Hello and welcome to Business Standard Views of the Week. What are the reasons behind the rise in consumer sentiments this month? What are the challenges before the Finance Minister for this year's Union Budget? And why is the danger of land subsidence increasing in Delhi NCR? Subscribe to Business Standard and read this week's top opinion pieces to find out. We start this episode by looking at the Index of Consumer Sentiments. The Index of Consumer Sentiments is recovering somewhat hesitatingly. The average weekly index of consumer sentiments in the 3 weeks that ended on January 9th, 16th, and 23rd was 59.9. And as of January 23rd, 2022, the 30-day moving average of the index of consumer sentiments reached 61. The 30-day moving average has surpassed the November peak. A recovery in the index of consumer sentiments, therefore, seems to be underway. But the recovery seems more hesitant than robust. The index of consumer sentiments reflects the views of households with respect to the current economic conditions and also the expectations of the future. In India, the index of consumer expectations has been systematically higher than the index of current economic conditions. This indicates that people in India are generally more positive and hopeful of the future than the assessment of their own conditions compared to the recent past. However, early results of January show that it is the index of current economic conditions that is leading the recovery. This is a positive sign. The index of current economic conditions has risen by 6.3%, and the index of consumer expectations has grown by a modest 2.5%. A faster improvement in current economic conditions with slightly higher confidence in the future, as is seen in the weekly sentiments data for January 2022, is a good development. Its stride needs to be bigger and a little more confident. Now let's turn our attention to the upcoming Union Budget. As Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman prepares to present her next budget, the scorecard of what she has achieved through her last budget provides a mixed picture. She looks set to achieve her accounting transparency goals. It is even likely she would not need any extra budgetary resources for 2021-22. Instead of a contraction of 7.3% in 2021, the economy is set to grow by 9.2%. However, the scars on the economy are visible. Inequality has risen, increasing employment remains a challenge. Private consumption demand is still below what it used to be 2 years ago. Inflation is rising and it threatens the stability of the past few years on the price front. In his latest column, Ashok Bhattacharya explains that the government's spending on the National Infrastructure Pipeline, rolling out the 4G technology, Digital India Mission, the scheme for the remission of duties and taxes on export products, and even the Jal Jeevan Mission has been way behind the targets, at least in the first 3 quarters of FY22. Moreover, despite the sale of Air India to Tata Group, the government has a poor record on the privatization front, with the proposed privatization of two state-owned banks and an insurance company not gaining any headway. Further, the repeal of the three farm laws and the delay in the implementation of the four labor codes also paints a poor picture of this government's commitment to reforms. As Ms. Sitharaman will reckon, making a budget when the economy is recovering poses more difficult challenges than what one faces while making a budget after the economy has contracted. From the economics of budget making, let's look at the economics of electoral promises. From free power to free water to direct monthly cash transfers to women, political parties have frequently relied on promises of income support to garner votes. However, in his latest column, Rajesh Kumar writes that the growing acceptability of income support and other promises being made by political parties reflects the system's inability to create income opportunities at the scale required. Compared to 5 years ago, the total number of people employed in 4 out of 5 poll bond states was lower in December 2021. Even at the national level, India's employment ratio is one of the lowest in the world. The female labor force participation rate is also one of the lowest, which perhaps explains the idea of promising cash transfers to women. The broader risk in this context is that an increase in subsidies or other forms of support would leave so much less for the government to spend on capacity enhancing heads, such as roads and schools. As a recent report in this newspaper showed, promises of cash transfer in Punjab may cost up to 12,000 crore per year. The state is expected to spend Rs 4,662 crores on health and family welfare in the current fiscal year. Competing promises of SOPs in elections are undesirable and can have severe unintended consequences. India needs a debate as to what percentage of general government revenue can be used for subsidies and cash transfers. Both the centre and states can then collectively finance support programs to enable efficient use of resources. Now let's talk about a matter that requires the urgent attention of policymakers. The revelation by a satellite-based study that about 100 square kilometers of land in the national capital region, close to Delhi's international airport, is sinking at an alarming pace is a worrisome matter that requires urgent remedial action. Equally disquieting is the fact that the sagging of land, technically called subsidence, is the result of unchecked over-extraction of groundwater, which has already turned scarce in the region. Although the jury is out on whether subsidence can be reversed or not, it certainly can be avoided by curbing indiscriminate withdrawal of groundwater and promoting its economic use. Any strategy to do so has to have two prongs: checking undue water extraction and ensuring its replenishment through rainwater harvesting. There is no dearth of regulations to keep a tab on groundwater extraction, What is lacking is effective enforcement. Unless the governance of the groundwater resource management is beefed up, the threat of land subsidence will continue unabated. Now let's analyze what it would take to transform India into a hub of global electronics manufacturing. The Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, or MeitY, wants to make India a $300 billion electronics manufacturing powerhouse by 2026. Currently, the value of electronics manufacturing in India is estimated by the government to be around $75 billion. And so, the roadmap hopes for a quadrupling of production in 5 years. Further, it hopes for electronics exports to increase from $10.6 billion in 2021 to $120 billion by 2026. The domestic market is also supposed to almost triple in that time, but it is clear from the numbers that the engine of growth is supposed to be exports. In an editorial, Business Standard points out that it is vital that the government views the production ecosystem as a whole if these targets are to be met. It is not just the final producer that matters, it is also component producers and further subcontractors. An ecosystem that includes both domestic and global firms will need to be induced to invest in the country, and not just the final exporter or lead firm. Low and stable tariffs are also essential. By industry estimates, tariffs in India create a cost disability of about 20% as compared to China and 10% as compared to Vietnam. Stable trade policy, less bureaucratic implementation of the rules of origin requirement, and extending benefits to ecosystem partners are prerequisites for this vision to succeed. Finally, we bring this episode of BS Views to a close by looking at the sale of Air India to Tata Group. Something had to be radically wrong with Air India for the entire country to welcome its privatization. This is a country in which Arun Shourie is still answering questions about the two terms on which, 2 decades ago, he privatized companies far less important than Air India. In noticeable contrast, there has been little or no criticism from any color of the political spectrum about the sale of a once iconic airline, except perhaps for some unconvincing noises from the Reds and some pro forma expressions of worry by sections of the employees. Pro forma because they must in fact be hugely relieved that the salary checks will keep coming. In his latest column, T.N. Nenan says that someone should get a comment out of the man who is quiet as a mouse after having set the airline on its crash course. Praful Patel, Civil Aviation Minister in the first Manmohan Singh government. It was Patel who pushed through the merger of Air India and Indian Airlines with disastrous consequences because the anticipated synergies were not realized. To conclude, Nenan quips that with the Tatas coming in as the white knight for the government's privatization agenda, it is expected that the Tata Group will no longer get attacked publicly by government ministers.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.